Hey everyone, Paprika here with another theory breakdown, and this time it's the best situation to make every unit in the game. When I first set out to do this, I thought this is a great idea because outside of the unit triangle, there are a lot of different reasons you might use a unit in different contexts. I thought, man, it'd be really cool if I just break those down. One, it helps solidify my own knowledge, but two, I think it'd be a good video. And then when you really look at the unit list and see how many unique units there are, yeah, so that's a reason you've seen a little bit of a pause in my videos. I've been working on this for literally a couple days. This is gonna be a very long video. I'm gonna put a chapter stamps at the bottom, so you can, if you're looking for specific units, you can find it down there, as well as hopefully in the track down in the video. But anyway, I want to use this video to give you some guidelines on when to use units, the context to use certain units, and how to best deploy them outside of just the basic unit triangle. I will not include siege or water in this. Siege, because if you check out my units video I did recently, you're gonna see how siege works, i.e. my beginner's guide where I break down units. Siege is pretty straightforward. I'm also not gonna break down water because I think I need to do a whole different thing on water, so I'm gonna do that. Lastly, with Knights Templar and House of Lancaster, things are still definitely being figured out with them. Ways to use their units, context they can be used in. So this is kind of how I understand it based on playing them, playing against them, and watching pros play them. So keep in mind the meta on them is constantly evolving. So if you're watching this months from now and I get to one of those units and you're like, that's not how they're used now, sorry. Anyway, let's get to it. As always, please like and subscribe. It helps immensely for a channel my size. And I've gotten over 2,000 subscribers recently, so awesome. Thank you so much. If you're interested in coaching or watching me on Twitch, you can look at those links in the description below the video. So first we have scouts. Wow, straight up. I said every unit. So they're good to the game, right? You want to check the opposition's army with them. And my suggestion is, especially if you're doing things like pro scouts, or you're doing or even if you just are done scouting for a minute and you're doing other things, put your scout on what I would call the next resources. So if you're looking at your opponent's base and they have all their initial resources in their TC, where is their next gold? Where is their next food? The next food's the one they're most likely going to go to, the next closest to your pack, next closest berries. Put it near that, so when you see them move out to it, you can then send units there immediately and raid. Warrior scouts are first unique unit. Warrior scouts for the Malians are a surprisingly really good unit. First, in feudal, they're very easy to mass. Then it costs food. So if you're looking for a convenient raiding unit to use against opponents, especially those opponents are just booming and you're also booming, of course you want to focus on your cow boom, but warrior scouts can be really good to just harass villagers on exposed resources or like an exposed gold without having to actually make expensive units. In mid castle, if you're low on resources, they can be a good front line. They also do extra damage against ranged in Castle Imperial, so generally I have seen Warrior Scouts used in Castle mostly just as a cheap frontline or against mass ranged before a Malian player can transfer into a better counter unit. They're also used in very late imp for torch power. You can use mass scouts as landmark snipe if you feel like you're going to lose the game or you feel like there's an opening to do so, especially if most of the time you go for of the Huntress as Malians, but if you go into their other landmark, the oh my gosh, I don't remember off the top of my head, I'm so sorry, but it can give you extra siege damage. You can pop that, do Warrior Scouts, burn them down. Of course, we have the Khan. The Khan is a unique scout for the Mongols, but you can only make one, and you auto get it, so when it dies, it will respawn. In feudal, you're going to see the Mongols, if you're a Mongol player, the Khan should always stay with your harassing units, whether that's Mangudai, whether that's Keshiks. It's really important because with its bonuses, with its special powers, it unlocks a lot of what makes Mongols really difficult to deal with. The speed arrow allows Mangudai to get away, or any cav really to outpace the opponent. Its eagle allows ranged units to hit on the opposite of like wood lines or walls or things like that, and its attack speed arrow is huge for engagements as well. So generally you want that Khan to be trailing with the army. In Castle to Imp, you often see the Khan used in two ways. One, in big fights, the attack speed arrow is massive, or a movement speed to disengage, of course, just like in feudal, but also in Castle to Imp, the Khan gets such a high damage that you can actually use the Khan to harass vills if you have the APM for it, and it can kill vills pretty quickly as well. So don't nag on the Khan's ability to deal out the damage if you really wanted to. So now it leads us to our first major unit, the Spear. The spear is the ultimate defense. I keep saying ultimate a lot, but you know what I mean. Spears are a really good defensive unit, and they do extra damage against cav. So how do they play in each stage of the game? Where are they strongest? In feudal, you will often see civs make spears for if they are booming or they're very defensive. That's because if the best way for your opponent to harass you is often with dives of cavalry, and so you want those spears to be sitting on exposed resources or exposed flanks so that those raids do not work. Spears also play a really important part if you're a civ who is massing range, because of course the best way to counter your range is with cavalry. So spears are often used for protection either of resources or protection of range units in feudal. In castle, they often play the role of just the cheap front line. In AoE 4, I think the general goal in almost any game is a mass of ranged that will allow you to win the game. Because usually one person in the game is going mass ranged of some sort. If one civ's going mass cav, especially knights, the opponent's going to go mass is going to go mass crossbow. It's just kind of how it works. So if your eco only can sustain you enough to make the mass crossbows, then spears are a great front line in castle. Imperial, though, spears actually kind of get their time in the limelight. In Imperial, spears actually are really, really important. A big part of Imperial, when you have those massive ecos and you're both kind of duking it out, is just trash spam. And especially if you are struggling against a lot of horsemen, or you have really powerful range units like really good Handcannoneers or really valuable siege, just massing spears is a great way to have something that takes damage while your range mass or your siege mass does work. So we're going to talk about how men-at-arms will often supplement spears in cases of better eco or in cases of certain unit opposition. But in Imperial, if you just need a unit just to eat damage, spears are cheap, they're quick to make, and you can make a ton of them with an Imperial economy. So in Imperial, they play that really important role of just trash spam. And not even really to kill knights. Like you can get so much cav in Imperial that it's hard for them to chase down the cav, or in some instances, the knights are like super, super strong. Spears just play just a vital role in just eating damage, while your better range or better siege dukes it out. That leads us to our variation spear. So some civs have spearmen that are unique or replace the original spearmen. So first with the Donso for the Malians, they're really unique because of their throwable spear. So you can use Donzos as a mass range unit in a way. If you get enough Donzos, they can just start sniping units whenever that spear goes on cooldown. On top of that, they are just a really solid spearman. They're used basically throughout the game. So if you look at Malians, they're used the most, of course, in feudal, because the Donso javelin comp is very, very strong. So Donzos definitely are used the most in feudal. After feudal in Castle Imperial, you generally see the Musafadi used because of its versatility against heavy units. Now, Donzos will still be used in Castle Imperial if they're facing a mass cavalry comp, of course, but you generally see Musafadi and Sofa supplement the Donso in Castle Imperial. Limitenai. Limitenai offer a lot more health than a normal spearman, and they also have the shield wall ability, which reduces ranged. So generally for biz, they're going to make them throughout all stages of the game. Like if you look at a biz player, I think there's kind of two strategies that exist for biz. One is the boom, where you do mass Limitenai and mass olive oil units, whether that's ranged, usually ranged, right? And that's your goal. And you're making Limitenai throughout the whole game because they're just such a good damage soak. They could eat ranged attacks, and they can protect those valuable olive oil units, which are usually ranged. The other variation is fast castle, or just a fairly good castle into mass cataphracts. It's kind of like the two lanes of Byzantine. And so Limitenai, if you're going the more boomy infantry based route, Limitenai are an all game. And man, in Imperial are so good because you can have such a good olive oil economy, and the fully upgraded Limitenai with the shield wall just don't die to range units. It's pretty crazy. So very, very good biz players make them all game. Some other variation spears that we have: the heavy spear from KT. Always use them. If you unlock them, always use them. Basically, they are unlocked in Castle with one of the special upgrades. You kind of, what you see right now for KT, for Knights Templar, is that it's either the heavy spear against a civ that, if you do that against civs that love to make horsemen or knights, or they go Genoese crossbows. So those kind of the two lanes. But heavy spears, similar to Limitenai almost, you make them no matter what. They're just a great front line. Great front line because they're heavy, so the opponent needs to make crossbows, which allows you then to make the counter to the crossbows very easily. Gilded spears for OTD. So OTD spears do extra cav damage, so they just slaughter. any cavalry they touch. It's pretty wild. So for OTD, they play a great use of frontline. So if OTD is doing a strategy that is not a castle into a Burgrave push, you generally see Gilded Spears as the go-to, because one, it just shuts down cav completely, and if you're not doing a castle timing push with Burgrave men at arms, you're generally doing mass crossbow with, and so thus you need spears. So the Gilded Spear is a solid make throughout the entire game. You generally see OTD players make them at all times, unless for the very specific, I'm trying to get to this castle timing move. Our very unique light units, which are ones that maybe not have a specific category of spear or men at arm. First, we have our Onna Bugeisha. They're basically like a glass cannon unit for Japan. Their use is generally early feudal, if you decide to go an all-in Japanese style where you just mass Onna Bugeisha like crazy. Now the thing is, they are countered by archers, right? What you're betting on is that with your cheap barracks, how fast you can make them, how cheap they are, you just outmass your opponent, completely overwhelm them, raid them off resources, attack one place to pull the archers, then attack the spot they used to be, and you're just killing those like crazy, and you're sacrificing your Onnas for the purpose of just doing this eco damage. Very good in that context. The issue is, in a normal game, in Castle Imperial, they fall off super hard, because the goal of the game is often to get to mass range. Most civs in some way want to get mass ranged, and Onnas will just do very poorly at that point. So in normal context, where it's just an average, you're both making units and fighting, Onnas will get worse and worse, and you don't see them much in Castle Imperial. The only other time you see Onnas in their best usefulness, if you're a Japanese player, is in the fast castle meta. What you're doing in the fast castle is you're going to go into fast castle, and you're going to go immediately into Mounted Samurai, which we'll get more into them later. You need to pair a unit with that Mounted Samurai. For a long time, that unit was the Onna Bugeisha. And it's still good. It's still a very good. If you want to run it as Japan, it's still dynamite. Because the Onna Bugeisha and the Mounted Samurai both use the same resources, so your eco is very easy to set up, food and gold. Second, they take care of what the Mounted Samurai struggles against. Onna Bugeisha are very good against spearmen. They're very good against crossbows. Mounted Samurai can kill everything else. Now, recently, with how cheap they've made Yumi, you see more and more people lean into Mounted Samurai Yumi in the fast castle scenario and mass Yumi throughout the game. So it has kind of fallen out of style to use Onna Bugeisha, though if you're someone who doesn't want to micro Yumi, Onna Bugeisha is still a very good option for you if you do that fast castle style. The other one is the Musafadi for the Malians. Musafadi play the anti-armor component for the Malians. They are basically a use-all game sort of unit outside of against like knights, like especially feudal knights or mass horsemen, which you'd rather go Donso. But outside of those contexts, Musafadi are just amazing. Especially if you get the boom off for the cow boom, you see it's very common to go early on mass Sofa, mass Musafadi together. And if the opponent can stabilize, you go into archers. But similar thing where Musafadi and Sofa are both food and gold units, a very similar strategy to the Japanese fast castle style as well. So the Musafadi are just a good overall unit. Pretty weak to ranged, but as a Malian player, if you use them at any point in the game, it's generally a good option as a good frontline and a do-it-all. They beat men-at-arms, they beat spearmen, they do okay against knights. Only thing really struggling against is horsemen and mass ranged. It's, as I said, safe frontline. And later in the game, they are replaced by Sofa. So as the Malian player's eco gets better, or the opponent is able to defend up, it's replaced by more heavy Sofa comp on top of archers. So if you're talking about Musafadi, it's like Musafadi Sofa, then Sofa Archer with the poison arrow. Now we move into men at arms. Men at arms are slow moving, solid, damage, high armor. When do you want to use these bad boys? When did they play the best? So if you can make men at arms in feudal, not every civ can, but some can. If you can make them in feudal, they're great if the opposing civ has no direct counter. What do I mean by that? If your opponent is a non-knight civ with no unit that does heavy damage or extra damage against heavy, then men at arms you can mass them and win a game that way. There are some civs that specifically struggle against men at arms, for example, like Byzantine. Delhi kind of struggles with men at arms too, though if they can get enough Gazis and they're good at microing, they can do okay. But the point being is, the issue with them in feudal is that they do cost a lot, and you can sink a lot of your feudal eco, which is a smaller eco than the rest of the game, into them, which can be difficult. So they have a weird spot in feudal. I see men at arms are often used into late feudal as your eco is growing and you have a mass range. Then you're using men at arms to just soak damage. Like if you are two civs playing and you're both making mass ranged, if you can have men at arms just play a really important role of just eating damage, which allows your range mass to do more damage while that men at arms is just eating shots. Castle, once again, men-at-arms are not huge in Castle. Reason being is there are a lot of things that can counter them on top of just their mobility issues. So knights beat them, crossbows beat them. Generally, everyone's making crossbows in Castle. So men-at-arms struggle, they're slow. So if we're talking about Castle, a lot of Castle's mobility, taking space, taking resources on the map. And so if you go into mass men-at-arms, you can get outrun against cav comps, and you can just find it hard to use them well. And once again, they're still kind of expensive, though. As you're getting into Castle, your eco's getting better and better, so it's okay. Generally, men-at-arms' best spot in Castle is if you're fast castling and defending a push. So the way you often see men-at-arms work the best, you have fast castled, your opponent is pushing you, men-at-arms can just generally tank and do really well as castle units and buy you space to then move into something else. Or if you're fast castling into your opponent hasn't aged up yet, but they have a lot of spears, maybe they made a lot of defensive spears, then mass men-at-arms attack can work. Imperial is where men-at-arms actually really shine. One, the fully upgraded men-at-arms can eat a lot of damage, and then Imperial, your food eco is very, very good, and men-at-arms are very food heavy. But they also can act as a great front line. So Imperial's where they shine because you can mass them like crazy, they eat a ton of damage, and they allow your range mass and siege mass, it's what you're really building in Imperial, to shine. So that's where the spear men-at-arm dichotomy comes in Imperial. You generally want to do spears if your food eco is a little weaker, or you have special spears, but let's say just general. Imperial, you're going spears if your opponent is like super heavy cav and you just need something to survive, or you're trying to defend a siege mass and your opponent's doing mass cav to snipe the siege. Men-at-arms are great if your food eco is really good and you are just trying to tank damage while your range mass does work, or maybe they're tanking damage while you have a cav mass that is then running around somewhere else. So that's kind of the distinction between the two. It also really depends on your men-at-arms. Like English men-at-arms with extra armor upgrades, amazing. Other men-at-arms don't play that role as well. Variation men-at-arms. So first we have the Gulam for Abbasid and Ayyubid. They have more health, less damage, but they do double strike. So basically they shred light units. Any unit that has low melee damage, Gulams freaking shred. Any unit that has high melee damage, they really struggle because they have less base damage. Now, the context for them is very different between Ayyubid and Abbasid. Abbasid loves to make Gulams because they have a lot of infantry upgrades, which make Gulam a lot better. Just more health, things like that. In Castle Imperial, you often see Abbasid use Gulams as just a really solid front line. Now, Abbasid also has really good spears, so once again, the context is your opponent doing heavy cav or not? Not heavy cav, Gulam's your go-to. Super heavy cav, especially knights, you might need to do spears. But Gulam just play an amazing role as a front line. They can eat so much damage, and they can deal it out against the right context. Especially Imperial, Gulams of full Imperial upgrades are great. The only issue is Abbasid in late Imperial really likes to turn into the mass Camel Archer, and what am I trying to say? Camel Archer and Camel Rider. But early Imp and Castle, they play a really important role. It's just a good tank. Also, you've seen Abbasid also always has that strategy in their back pocket of a fast castle into Gulam spam. Solid, really good. If your opponent's not ready for it, Gulam just go everywhere and kill everything. Ayyubid tends to use Gulam a lot less. Why? They don't have really any bonuses for them. Unlike Abbasid, which has special upgrades for the Gulams, they have bonuses around Gulams. Ayyubid doesn't. Ayyubid is the camel siege civ. They have bonuses for camels, they have bonuses for siege. So Gulams kind of play this weird role. Generally, Ayyubids want to mass camel lancers, they want to mass archers, they want to mass siege. So just not really used. Ayyubids, you're not leaning to your strengths as Ayyubids if you're using Gulams. Next, we have the Varangian Guard for the Byzantines. They're not really that meta. Why? Well, they are like the opposite of the Gulam. They have lower health, but high and lower armor, but they have high damage. That's all well and good, but if in our games where we often see mass range be the go-to for almost anybody, they just die. They die really fast. And especially when you have the Limitenai, which can eat so much range damage, it's just really hard to say, yes, I want to go into these units as my power through. They just die really fast. Now, their situational use is that time I talked about where if it's early castle and you're getting pushed as Byzantines, a quick Varangian push can open up space, but they're just not great tanks and they fold. So their best use is either defending, being all in as you're hitting castle, or their other use is if your opponent is doing mass melee, because they do hold up really well against melee units, and they do really a lot of damage to melee units because they have high damage, right? So If your opponent's like mass melee, sure. If your opponent is pushing your hit castle, you just need to make units to hold, sure. But outside of that, Byzantines are either doing that mass Limitenai or they're doing the mass cataphracts. Samurai, interesting, because they're technically really beefy, but good players avoid them and play around them, and it makes them weak. And then once the mass crossbows come out, they just die. So samurai have no unique stats, but they do have deflective armor, which means they can take one hit for free, which is way bigger than it might sound on the surface. And also they have a lot of unique upgrades that give them a lot of damage, a lot of damage, so they can wreck other units. And unlike Varangians, they have good health, good armor. Their strongest is really in feudal. In feudal, a strong feudal samurai all in, if your opponent's not prepared for it, can be devastating. I won games doing it, especially against opponents who are trying to castle. If you show up with a good ram push with samurai, they can just tank damage forever, hunt vills, especially paired with Onna Bugeisha or Yumi or Horseman, a faster unit that can hunt down vills while that samurai is eating damage. Very, very good. Castle, as I said, they start to struggle just because crossbows wreck them. Knights can do really well against them, and so they just start to really struggle. Now, in Castle, they will work if your opponent is doing mass melee, right? Because your samurai can do so much damage, especially against melee units, but smart players will avoid making melee against you. Smart players will not want to do mass arms against Japan. You're just asking to lose. So they really, really struggle in Castle. Then Imperial, they get good again because they're amazing to spam. If you have a really good Japanese eco, you don't have that mounted samurai mass that Japanese players love to have, then yes, they're a great spam unit. Just spam them, throw them, have them run around everywhere. They can tank an insane amount of damage. And then they're frontlining for either a Yumi mass, a Handcannoneer mass, or Onna musha mass, something. But like, they're with full Imperial upgrades, yeah, they're amazing tanks. If you're playing against a civ that has a lot of knights or a lot of crossbows, they'll still struggle, but they can eat units while something else is doing damage. And they're much better at it than like the average men are. Jeanne's champions. It's interesting. I was setting this up and then was just watching some games from the EGC Elite Classic, and Jeanne's champions are being used. So it was great to see them contextually how they're being used. So Jeanne's champions, they're stronger, of course, just for JD. They're stronger than men at arms, but they're very expensive. So contextually, also they do extra damage to spear. So contextually, they're used if the JD player is able to make multiple barracks so they can consecrate, which is their special ability, which makes units cheaper. They're very good if you can get multiple barracks with consecration on them. Basically, the way you're using them is if you have attacked an opponent a lot in feudal, they have massed a lot of spears, and you're trying to do a big push. Once they've made those spears into castle, guess what? These men at arms do great. But if you're trying to mass them against something that's not spears, they will struggle. If there's a lot of crossbows, they'll struggle. And once again, they're just expensive. So even with the consecration, you'll burn through food making them. So it'll be harder to make knights. So you have to ask yourself, is it really worth to make them? So they're not used a lot, but if used in the right context, are very, very strong, which is I've forced my opponent to mass spears. I'm making these Jeanne's champions because I want to just dive their eco and not have archers, which like die under TC or things like that. Gilded Men at Arms OTD. Extremely tanky, especially with the mine work upgrade. Feudal, same thing as samurai. OTD has the classic feudal all-in with the ram push, just pure men at arms. You're just running through their eco, tanking damage, chasing villagers, shutting down their eco. But really, you see men at arms used, these gilded men at arms used the best for the fast castle, or quick castle at least, Burgrave mass in the push. That's because Burgrave makes them cheaper, much cheaper. Burgrave also makes them quickly. So what you can see is whether 1 TC or 2 TC, the OTD player will go into Burgrave, make a lot of men at arms, pair them with crossbows, and just push. It's very strong. If the opponent is not specifically preparing for it or their eco isn't that good, they will lose to it. And they can take, once again, so much damage. And you don't have to do mine work for them. You can do Aachen into this 2 TC into push, or 1 TC into the push, whatever you want to do. Amazing. Outside of that Burgrave push, you know, mass crossbows, knights, they'll do really well against them, and they're very expensive, so it feels like you're throwing your unit away in that case. Imperial, they play the same roles as any men at arm. If you have a great eco, man, they can tank a lot of damage for your very strong range mass of crossbows or Handcannoneers, Gilded Handcannoneers. But without that strong eco, it's better just go Spearman, because the one thing you're worried about against most civs when you have ranged or siege is Horsemen and Knights, and the OTD Spearmen shred those. So if you can make them, great. If not, Spearmen do really fine. Focus on your ranged for OTD. Palace Guards for China and Zushi, another unit that is used very differently between the two variation civs, similar to Gulam. So they have less armor, but they're fast. Zushi can use them in feudal, and really you see Zushi use the most in feudal. There is strategies where Zushi, you age up and do mass Palace Guard spam, once again against civs that don't have good meta arm counters, and you do that Palace Guard spam because they're not expecting that for you basically, and they can run around, raid, take good damage, be all over the place, and you're usually doing some sort of castle behind it, maybe taking deer, whatever it may be. After that, you generally don't see Zushi use them, because they're trying to either go into Cav because of the Dali horse upgrade, or they're going into mass range because of the Zhuge, Grenadier, and Nested Beast. China, a little bit different. They get them in Castle, and they don't use them much in Castle. That's because I think as China, you're generally wanting to make Nested Bees and Crossbows, and so Spearmen are your go-to. You just mass spears. Your foodie is usually very good, but you want to use your gold on other things. Now in Imperial, China gets those special upgrades for Palace Guards. And then you pair that with Yuan Dynasty with extra speed, or you pair that with Ming Dynasty and the extra health and damage. It's crazy. They're so good. One of my favorite strategies is China. You hit Imp, your opponent hasn't really walled up really well. You go Yuan Dynasty for the speed. Now your Palace Guards are as fast as Knights, and they're so tanky with the full Imperial upgrades, and you just run them. Just run them everywhere. Especially if the Imperial Palace, pop the Imperial Palace, boom, you see where all the opponent's villas are. You send groups of Palace Guards everywhere. The only thing I can kill them is mass Crossbows or Knights, and even then Knights will struggle. Like, I'm not joking. It's so good. And you just vill hunt, and then once you've done enough damage, because that's the whole point of Imperial. If you're both Imperial, you both have probably good ecos. It's who can do the most eco damage at that point. Whether we're Horsemen, whether we're Palace Guards, what have you. Then once you've done a lot of damage, you switch into Spearman, Handcannoneer, and Siege, and you go for the win. And even then, the Palace Guards are an amazing frontline. So if you have the eco to do Handcannoneers and Palace Guards, do it. But like, amazing unit. Then we have the Earls Guard from House of Lancaster. So they're faster MMA, but lower armor, similar to Palace Guard in a way. But I don't think they're as fast as Palace Guard. I should have looked that up, my bad. They're unlocked in Castle. Basically, they're good throughout the game. They're a really good front line because, one, they can throw the dagger, which is really nice. Two, their damage is solid, and you have to think about, for the context of House of Lancaster, they're massing Yeomen. You want a unit that can hold while your Yeomen attack and your Yeomen do the money shot and all those things. So they're good. Imperial, they become amazing. They're really, really good because I've seen House of Lancaster players rush Imp, drop multiple keeps, and spam Earl's Guard. Because as you add more keeps, they get more damage, and which makes their dagger better. If Berkshire, you can do all the way up to +8. And now they're just like sniping units with their daggers. It's really crazy. So if you're playing House of Lancaster, use these babies if you get the Yeoman mass. Unless your opponent's like super massive cav, then yeah, sure, do spears. And Imperial, get your keeps up, mass these bad boys. They are killer. And finally, we have our variation MMA edition, KT edition. KT, man, they have so many unique units. They get this page also for Knights because they have a lot of Knight options. So, men at arms for KT suffer from, while they're all cool, very cool, they suffer from the similar issue. They also have from the same issues, which is the cavalry options for KT are just better. So, for example, you have Hospitaller Knights and you have Sergeants. You don't see them very often because it's just much better to do the Chevalier, I call them the Chevy Knights, the French option feudal. So you just don't see them. Now keep in mind, a Hospitaller Knight and Sergeant both have very interesting use cases. The Hospitaller Knight can heal, and so you definitely have this feudal style where you do a feudal line and you just keep healing, so your fights are always better. And the Hospitaller Knight gets really strong in Castle and Imperial, so like they're good throughout the game. But you have to play around them, and if your opponent has good men at arm counters, and even then, even though they don't have a men at arm counter, Hospitaller Knight is weak to ranged in feudal, so it just doesn't feel as good, right? You'd rather do the Chevy Knight. Sergeants, I think their best usage is actually defensive, because they can do melee damage, but they're ranged melee damage. They just snipe rams. So if you're doing like 2TC KT against a super aggressive opponent, Sergeants aren't a bad move. And they get a really beefy as you age up. But once again, the Chevy Knights just feel better because as KT, you're all about map control for the Pilgrims, and the Chevalier Knights just do so much better. I've slaughtered them 1,000 times, get used to it. Then we go to Imperial, same thing. You could do Teutonic Knights, or you could do Contitero. I'm sorry, I'm a dumb American who can't pronounce foreign words. Both of them have really interesting use cases. The Teutonic Knight debuffs units around them, so they can swing fights just from their debuffs. They also gain health as they kill units. The Contitero is great against gunpowder units. They're very fast. They have actually no real counter. They're not a light or heavy unit. The only thing that does extra damage to them is Springholds. So technically they don't take any extra damage from any unit. But once again, oh my god, what are those knights called for KT? We'll get to them soon. But the knight option for KT and Imperial is just so much better. It's just disgustingly better. And so you're just not going to see these units made until those units are nerfed, honestly, or these units are buffed more. So you're just not going to see them very much. And as a KT player, you probably shouldn't use them. You probably just use your knight options. Time for us to go into archers. Archers, great at poking vills, great at defense, cheap, very easy to mass. Basically, like, the game in feudal is who can make the most archers. Unless you're playing against knights, then you can't really do them. But in games where neither civ have knights, it's kind of whoever gets above 30 archers kind of wins, because once you get to a certain amount of archers, they kill everything, right? So in feudal, mass archers equals win. Once again, not against castle civs, but generally feudal archers equals win. Very early castle, there's a good timing push where if you've been in massive archers, you hit castle, you upgrade them and push before your opponent hits castle. Very, very good as well. In a fast castle setting, being paired with knights is also very good, because then your opponent wants to make spears against your knights, so your archers can counter that. Outside of that, castle, they really fall off. Because the prevalence of knights, the prevalence of men at arms, instead you want to make crossbows. So you just don't see archers really have that much use in castle outside of those like fast castle styles. Later Imperial, they start to really hit their groove again once you get fire arrows, incendiary arrows, and they get full upgrades. Because once Imperial is weird, Imperial is like its own game. You both have amazing ecos. You're both just sending units like crazy, and so archers can play a really important role of just a trash spam unit. Especially if you're low on resources, they can play, and you're like defending within building areas. So like if they're melee, they get stacked up. Archers can do really well. If your opponent's doing a lot of Handcannoneers, archers can counter Handcannoneers. So the key to them being good though is like a lot of archer ranges. So you're making them like crazy. But the reason they do also kind of struggle with Imperial is because a very common strategy is mass Horseman Imperial, which I'll get to soon. So the context that you want to make archers Imperial is against mass Handcannoneers, or if you have a very special archer that's good, which we'll get to soon, or you're just low on resources and need to mass a unit. It can hold up, especially if you get a lot of them, but it's not ideal compared to some of your other options. Our variation archers. So you have the English Longbow and Yeomen House of Lancaster. They are two technically different units, but they play a very similar role. Longbows have more range than Yeomen and more attack, but they're slow. Yeomen have more range than archer, but not as much as a Longbow. And they don't have the same amount of damage as a Longbow, but they're fast. So that makes them very good. Now, why I say they're the same? Well, in feudal, you want to mass them and you win. Like, both English and House of Lancaster want to mass them, even against Knight Civs, honestly, because their damage is pretty good and their range is good and their speed is good for Yeomen or Longbow, depending on the context. But even against Knight Civs, if you're playing very defensive, you want to make a lot of them, and at a certain point, they'll start killing Knights. Castle, if you enter castle with a mass of them, like you've been fighting, enter castle, then you can just keep making them. Honestly, they're very, very good. If you, for some reason, enter castle, you don't have a lot of them, then you probably want to do crossbows, just because the heavy units are coming, my man. So you want to do crossbows. Late imp, full upgrades, they're great again. Hashtag make them great again. And you can just kind of make them. You don't even need crossbows once you get full upgrades on them, which is great because then you can funnel your gold into other units like men at arms, or knights, or siege, and just make these bad boys. So basically good throughout the game except mid castle. The Zhuge, once again, just a disgusting archer. Just so good. China and Zushi, once again, used very differently between the two of them. Now, for both of them in feudal, you can just make them and win. In fact, Zhuge, they can make them even easier. China has to go Song, which means they make both their feudal landmarks, but Zhuge, you can make them in feudal, and the feudal all-in was Zugnu as his tale as old as time. Now, context. Against English and Malian, not as great. Malian with the javelin thrower holds up really well against Zugnu. English with the longbow, and technically against House of Lancaster as well with the Yeomen, can, if in the hands of a player with good APM and good micro, can really make it hard on Zugnu. So generally what you see is, for China at least, Zhuge doesn't have archer at all. They only have Zugnu. China does have the archer option. So against English, you see China make archer, and against Malians, you kind of have to make it almost, because archer's not faring any better. At least the Zugnu's doing 3 damage. But maybe you're doing more heavy horseman comp. And you can do archer against Malians just because it's cheaper than the Zugnu. In castle, they really fall off unless you enter castle with like 40 of them, right? And then you're just upgrading, you go. Zhuge, they do a little bit better because you have the extra bolt, but it's just not really a thing. So if you enter with a bunch of them, sure, but you want to go crossbows, because once again, the way people are going to counter Zugnu is making heavy units and siege. So you want crossbows for the heavy units, and you want horsemen or men at arms or something, or spearmen for the siege. Imperial, whole different story. So this is Zhuge only, because still in Imperial, you just don't see China use Zugnu as much. They're going to go into Handcannoneers. Their Handcannoneers are very good with special upgrades. They're not variation Handcannoneers, just good Handcannoneers for China. For Zhuge, you don't have a Handcannoneer, and so your Zugnu fully upgraded is amazing. I'm talking incendiary arrow, I'm talking extra bolt, I'm talking the 1000 bolt upgrade to the Zhuge's library. You can do up to like 16 damage 3 times because you're doing the 3-shot, right? Which is just disgusting. So as Zhuge, one of your win conditions Imperial is like a massive 40 or more Zugnu, fully upgraded. They're tearing through everything. You don't need crossbows anymore, especially when you pair them with your cav, which are very, very good. It makes a great win condition. Gilded Archer for OTD. So similar to Yeomen in a way, not similar actually, strike that, but they have 5.5 range, which is better than Archer. They attack 1 attack every second, which is super fast. Like if you actually watch them, they're shooting really, really fast. Feudal, massing them is a great way to win as OTD. So just doing like a basic spearman frontline with mass gilded archers against non-knight civs is amazing. Against knight civs it won't work as well, right? But against everything else, wowza, they're just a great unit in feudal. Castle, they have a really interesting situational context. If you're in castle and you're fighting against a civ with mass ranged, or you've entered castle and they have mass ranged and you don't really have that many, gilded archers are very good because you can get the scale armor upgrade, which gives them extra ranged armor, so they're holding up super well against other ranged masses. So, which I think the reason that does put that in there is that you're just gonna have less, right? And which with a ranged mass, it's all about numbers. So giving them extra ranged armor allows them to hold up, and boy do they hold up. Now, if your opponent goes into mass cav or mass men at arms, they'll do worse. But if you're facing that situation, your opponent's doing really heavy ranged, mass OTD archers in castle is a great use. Imperial, man, it really depends on your opponent's common resources. Ideally, you want to make crossbows. Ideally, you want to make gilded Handcannoneers. We'll get into that soon. But if your opponent's doing like mass spears, because you're doing like mass horsemen, so if your opponent's like mass spears or they're mass Handcannoneers, and you're kind of low on resources, fully upgraded gilded archers do great, and they'll hold and they'll do pretty well. Almost like, once again, Yeomen and longbows, but not quite as good. And the issue is you can't mass as many of them because they count as 2 pop as you can for longbow and Yeomen. The Yumi archer for Japan. Cheap, fast, easy to mass. That's how people described me in high school. Sorry. So for a long time, people thought Yumi were trash outside of some high-level players who swore by them, but generally people didn't like them. Then with the recent meta shift, which was they just made them cheaper, you can make them so fast. You can make so many of them. So in feudal, paired with the bannerman, good in the context of if your opponent is making a lot of spears for some reason and you can get a lot of them, great. You just don't see it that much in feudal still, and you need the bannerman for them to be good. The only time I've seen Yumi made in feudal a lot for Japan is if you're both doing Dark Age play, like on a Lightning Horizon, where you're both making spears early, so going to Yumi is effective. Now, they have been seeing a lot of play in the Japanese fast castle style, which is admittedly one of the most popular styles of Japan. You go mounted samurai, you then start making Yumi because you mass them very quickly, and you have 4 spears with your mounted samurai. And then Imperial, once again, you want to, hypothetically, as Japan, you're still making mounted samurai Imperial, so you're making Yumi archers to match with them. The issue that you run into potentially in Imperial is that if both you have really strong eco economies, pop efficiency becomes a major thing. You don't want to make units that are too expensive because you're burning through eco, but you don't want to make units that are so trash that they're being beat by other units costing the same pop. They're both 1 pop. So Yumi can get bad in Imperial when you're both just massing and attacking because they're just not that strong. Even with full upgrades, they're just not going to hang the same way. And they need to have the bannerman with them to be effective. So that could become an issue, but you're kind of doing Yumi to trade them out constantly and to force your opponent to take worse trades because you are just making so many of them. Mounted archers, the bane of my existence, and I think for many players. So first, horse archer for Rus. What's unique about them, their base damage is super high. They unlock them in castle, and basically it's very common if you're a Rus player, do this. You spam them for map control. You're using them as a way, especially in that pro scout meta style where you get a whole bunch of deer, so you have a lot of food. They're just food and wood, so you enter castle, drop like 3 archery ranges, and you just spam them. And you're running all over the place. You're running to try to find any exposed eco, because even the sliver of exposed villagers will just die to these archer boys. And then you run away. If they come at you, you run away. Second of all, they get the Boyar's Fortitude Cav health upgrade, so they can get even tankier in castle. So you spam them, your opponent goes Horseman or Archers to counter them, and then you go Knights and boom, you win. So very, very good. And Imperial, it depends contextually. If you enter Imperial with a lot of them, upgrading them to Imp and then making them, and then they get the biology upgrade, they get the silk bowstrings, like they get everything. So that technically makes them pretty good. But if you don't have a lot of them, it's not worth it. You're better just going to Streltsy. Like that's the thing. The Streltsy are so good for Rus that you don't want to avoid them and lose slots to horse archers unless of course you enter Imperial with like 30 of them. Then yeah, sure, go for it. But if not, you generally want to do Streltsy as Rus. Mangudai for the Mongols. So low attack but very high mobility. Technically slower than a horseman, but faster than a knight. So in feudal, they're used to just punish exposed eco. Mongol players, you want to make these units because if your opponent has anything exposed, they'll do really well. Now you want to pair them with the Khan and the Khan Hunter. The Khan Hunter is just another Mangudai, but it gives a bonus range to other Mangudai and archers. The Khan gives you the vision. So the way you want to use this is you're running by the wood line of the opponent. You pop the eagle so you can see. With the Khan Hunter, you have the range, and boom, you're just killing Vils. It's very annoying. Castle, they start to struggle if your opponent can get walls up and you guys are taking like pitched fights, because the Mangudai's strength is not a pitched fight, duke it out sort of thing. They once again, the low damage. Their strength is running around and never being caught and killing exposed eco. So if your opponent can get walls up, you guys are doing these pitched fights, they're not as good. Now Imperial, full upgrades, they're brutal. They get the silk bowstrings, fire arrows, and biology. With Khan Hunters, they can get extra range, extra attack. They're so good. They start killing everything, honestly. So if you get to Imperial and just mass Mangudai with mass Keshiks, you're winning the game. Especially, man, if you can get to Imperial, get into their food eco, just run through their food eco, it's game over. So yeah, pretty good. Mounted archers, Camel Archer for the Abbasid. So same as Horse Archer in a way, very high base damage, and they do extra damage against spears. Their main power point is mid to late feudal and late imperial. So mid to late feudal, as Abbasid, you generally want to, make multiple TCs, usually 2, if not more. So they're a good defensive unit. You don't want to open with them because they're so expensive. But if your opponent's making a lot of cav, or they're making men at arms, they can debuff the cavalry. They do really well against men at arms. So especially if you're doing a multi-TC and your opponent does like a fast castle and a men at arm push, Camel Archer, great. Castle, they kind of fall off. They're expensive. There's a lot of mass range, kill them, right? So that you have a couple of them for like the debuff. Late Imperial, full upgrades, they're so good. High damage, mobility, lots of health. Counter kill spears, which people are making a lot of in Imperial. And pair really well with Camel Riders, which we'll get to soon. Very, very good. And late Imperial with the full upgrades. Desert Raider for Aibid. Love this unit. It's a weird unit though. So it's versatile, very expensive, but versatile. It can shoot, it can melee. They do extra damage against cav. They take extra damage from cav because they're technically a range unit. They have super high melee armor, no ranged armor. They debuff cav. So like, they're a knight killer. Like, honestly, they do great against knights because knights don't do any extra damage against range. So Desert Raiders actually just kill knights. Horseman is very weird. If it's Horseman versus Desert Raider will win. If it's like 2 Horsemen versus Desert Raider, Horseman wreck them. Because like then the actual extra damage is so it's like feast or famine between the two sides, basically. But they're great because you can win, then you can go harass villagers, you can be, they're mobile, so it's just like they're very good, but you have to play smart with them because once again they're expensive, you don't want to throw them away. In Feudal, there's a whole strategy based around them where you mass Desert Raiders, you can go Logistic Wing and do healing with them, which is very good, or you could do Military Wing and make rams with them, just ram push with them. But that's pretty legit because your opponent needs to get range mass out, and then you could move into mass Horseman, which kills that ranged, or you could just keep doing Camel Desert Raiders, honestly. But Feudal, they're very strong if used correctly and used smartly. Castle, very situational because generally IUBids in Castle want to go mass Camel Lancers, and we'll talk more about that when we hit the Camel Lancer section. But generally in Castle, IUBid players want to do mass Camel Lancers and lean away from Desert Raiders because once again, Castles where you start seeing mass ranged really start to happen. I guess situationally use Desert Raiders if in Castle, if your opponent is doing like mass ranged mounted range units because they debuff those mounted range units and hold up pretty well. Such as like Mangudai, they do great against Mangudai. But at the same time, in like similar with other mounted units where if you enter Castle with a lot of them, upgrading them and using them can still be really good. But Imperial, they become one of the best Imperial units in the game. They're crazy. Full upgrades, they can fight everything. They get the fire arrow, they get slip bow streams, they get biology, and then they get buffs from IUBid naturally because of the building up the golden age they do, and so they can pull they can kite forever and just do insane damage. If you chase them with horsemen or knights, they just pull their swords and kill them. It's honestly pretty insane. So Feudal, Imperial, amazing unit. Castle, Crossbows. It is the do-it-all unit, man. You make crossbows. If you're in Castle, you make crossbows. Simple as simple is. They counter heavy and they have a high base damage, so they do pretty well against spears as well. And they do okay against horsemen unless there's like a lot of horsemen. Castle, you make them almost always, unless your opponent is mass trash. So I mean, if your opponent is mass spear, archer, horseman, they're not going to do great. But if your opponent starts making heavy, which they almost always do, men at arms, knights, or whatever special heavy unit they have, you have to make crossbows. So mass trash, no. If they start making any heavy units, get these bad boys on the field. Late Imperial, they start to lose their strength. Because for high damage, you want Handcannoneer. For mass trash, you want Archer. So like, it basically becomes you'd rather do one or the other once you get to late Imperial, but up to early Imperial to that point, still very good. Once it becomes like you're doing these mass shifts between comps, they might not be as good as just a really high damage Handcannoneer or really versatile counters other things Archer. And cheap. Like, Archers are much cheaper than crossbows. Variation crossbows. We have some interesting stuff here. All of these crossbows are really good in their own way. Arbaletrier, one of the best units in the game, but you don't see them very much because French and JD player, the meta right now is really heavy knights into like really heavy knights into the Royal Institute. There we go. And giving them super health buffs and just going for it. And then you want to do archers with those, right? But the Arbaletrier, very high melee armor. They have a lot of upgrades, which gives them more damage, faster attack speed, and the Gambitsin, which you just dropped to give him more armor, and so you can like hold your spots really well with that ability and just take really good fights. And so here's the thing: I feel like you see Arbaletrier a lot in two contexts for French and JD. One, you've lost a lot of knights, and it's too expensive to remass knights, so you haven't really put a lot of resources into upgrading them. So you're like, F it, I'm just going to do Master Arbaletrier. Second one is if you're against civs that have a lot of knight counters, IUBid, IUBid, Abbasid come to mind. yeah, you kind of need to do mass Arbaletrier instead, because your knights are just getting countered 1,000 different ways. Onomusha for Japan. For castle use, I see Onomusha used the most as if you're trying to fast castle, your opponent has a lot of knights, you might open Onomusha first just to pick up knights and avoid them, and then once those knight numbers go down, you add mounted samurai. Outside of that, you're generally making units that can beat heavy units on their own. You can make mounted samurai, which can beat knights, can beat men at arms. You can make samurai, which can beat men at arms as well. If you're making mass samurai, your opponent then starts making knights, yeah, you sure make Onomusha. Their imperial use basically is they're a really good rated unit. Like any unit that has mobility and ranged, so a mounted range unit, is really good for as a raider. So if you need a unit like that, if you have Onomusha fully upgraded, they do some work as raiders, but you're generally as Japan leaning into mass mounted samurai, in which you want Yumi archers paired with them, or you're doing mass samurai and you want them paired with like Handcannoneers, or Yumi or Siege. Gilded Crossbow for OTD. One of the most important units for OTD. Now here's the thing. They're bugged right now, as of the making of this video. They shoot faster than they're supposed to. Even when they nerf that, they're still a unit you absolutely need to make. Absolutely. Now, the only time you generally don't see them used at first is potentially in some fast castle builds. So if you're doing the fast castle build where you're trying to get relics and go imp, not the best strategy for OTD in my opinion, but some people try it, then yeah, you're not making them, because you're going to go into knights and you're going to grab the relics and you're going to age up and then you're going to make Handcannoneers. Another other context, you're making crossbows. High base damage, so they kill everything. Very high damage against heavy units, so they're doing good. They're only replacing Imperial by hand cannons, in the sense that, oh, sorry. And then Castle, you sometimes do Mass Archer instead, as I said earlier, because they aren't doing Mass Archer. Only replacing Imperial by hand cannon, because the hand cannon for, we're gonna get to them soon, it's just so good. The Gilded Handcannoneer is so good. But those are very expensive, right? So you might do mass crossbow until you can afford that switch into Handcannoneers. But yeah, just a very good unit. You're gonna want to make that as OTD. That takes us to our last range unit, the Handcannoneer. Imperial damage dealer. If mass, they kill everything, right? Once you get above like 25 to 30, they're killing everything. But the problem is they're expensive. So generally, once you hit Imperial, for most civs, we'll get into the differences soon, you don't want to just start making them instantly. You'll struggle to make them in numbers that will make them effective, and they get sniped, they're just dying really fast. Because once again, they're weak, right? Archers kill them, horsemen kill them. Or if you don't have enough of them to do stopping damage, they'll get overwhelmed. So it's something you want to switch into if you have the large eco to sustain them. So if you can mass them, great. Don't force into them in situations where you can't afford a lot of them quickly. And of course, they need a front line. Even though they will kill everything, you still need a basic front line, which is where spears come in or horsemen come in, which I'll get to soon. Variant Handcannoneers. The Musafadi Gunner has more attack, more movement speed. So yeah, use if you're Malians. Streltsy are broken. They're cheaper, but they have the same stats, and they have high melee damage. What? Yes, it's insane. Streltsy are so good. So the difference is, for Roos, the second Imperial, make them instantly, make a lot of them, just make them like crazy. You do not wait with them, you make them instantly. Also, Streltsy have, if they hold still, they start doing better. So yeah, they're just, make them. Gilded Handcannoneer, same thing. You want to make them instantly because they're just so good. You gotta start massing, but you want to protect them. They're so precious. They're so important. Once you make a Gilded Handcannoneer, everything is just keeping them alive. Because if you can get to like 15 Gilded Handcannoneers, the world opens up for you. Once again, if you're facing mass archers as OTD, then you can't make Gilded Handcannoneers. But once you get rid of the archers, Gilded Handcannoneers are so good. And then you make men at arms or horsemen or spearmen, something to frontline for them. But look at these stats: 240 health, 1.12 attack speed. They're like machine guns, and 41 base damage. 41 base damage. Killer. Genoese crossbow. Now you say the crossbows in the name. I get it, but they're basically a Handcannoneer for KT. Knights Templar doesn't have a Handcannoneer. Now you have to choose them for the Genoa upgrading castle, but they have and the reason I don't consider them crossbows, they don't do extra damage against heavy. They have a very high base attack like a Handcannoneer, and they do extra damage against melee units, which Handcannoneers kind of do with the Serpentine powder upgrade. So it's like they're basically a Handcannoneer for Knights Templar. If you go into them, a strategy is just massing them. They're very strong. They're very high attack. Just mass them and make spears and men at arms or something to cover for them. Or like the Chevy Knight. Broom, broom, broom. Janissary, once another very, very good unit for Ottoman. Extra damage to Cav. You can get them in castle. They, like, if you watch any Cav unit charge Janissaries, they just melt. They just disappear right before you guys. Thanos snapped. So they're perfect for the Ottoman power comp. You do mass Sipahi, you do mass Janissary, you do siege, whether it's Mangudai or Springald, and you win. Bada bing, bada boom. So yeah, you want to make them instantly in castle and keep massing them. The only time they're kind of bad, if you try to mass Janissaries with no front line and your opponent doesn't meta arms, they don't do amazing against meta arms. They do good, but not amazing. So their base damage is lower, but they have a lot higher damage against Cav, which is why you want Springalds and Sipahi with that. Then the Black Rider for the HRE, you can only make a certain amount of them. They're riding Handcannoneer, so hell yeah, you make that. You can raid with them. Like, they're pretty cool. Yeah, make them, make as many as you can, use them. Horseman, a unit that I love. I think Horsemen are amazing, but you have to use them right. They're a ranged counter and a raider. They're not technically really a frontline brawler. It's now, because they have no melee armor, but they are fast. Now for early feudal, that's where they really pop at first, and they can't. So for like feudal civs, yes, they are a frontline fighter because you don't have anything else. You have spearmen, maybe, but like unless you have meta arms or unless you have knights, you're kind of making horsemen as a good tank, and unless you're fighting at spears, which is why you're gonna have archers no matter what in feudal. But early feudal, use them as a resource denial, and for dives. So you're diving, maybe onto the wood line or to the gold. You're doing resource denial, or you're cutting off reinforcement lines. So if your opponent's pushing you, horsemen are great for taking out reinforcements before they get to the army. But if your opponent starts having really any spears, they'll die really fast. But they're definitely one of the strongest in feudal. In castle, you want to make them contextually. You don't just want to make horsemen castle because they'll die very, very easily. But if your opponent's like mass range, like mass crossbow, mass archer, great. If your opponent is really all over the map on resources, great. But castles where you start to really move into your infantry comps and your power comps, unless you have a special horseman that you want to make for a reason, they really fall off in castle. And imperial is where they freaking shine, man. So what happens is everything about the game in imperial, as I said earlier in this video, is you both have massive ecos. Who can hurt the other's eco and then force fights that bleed them out faster, because you're both like running into each other again and again. Who can harm the eco of the other and then use that to finally win the waves. Now for most civs, they get, you know, upgrades for their horsemen. You get biology, you get a lot more damage. Their speed, they're the fastest thing in the game, and so what you see people often do is they just do a mass switch into horseman imperial, and then you're running horsemen all over the place. It becomes, did you wall well? Did you get your stone walls up? Are your farms protected by towers and keeps? Because if not, horseman raids will kill you. And since your eco is so good in imperial, you can just make horsemen like crazy and throw them away. So in early feudal, making horsemen's expensive. They're a lot of food, they're a lot of wood, and losing them really hurts the spearmen. And imperial, you can throw those things away like nothing, man. It doesn't matter. Your eco is so good that you can just make horsemen and throw them away. And if you're killing vills while throwing them away, perfect. Variant horsemen, which gets into some really interesting horseman options. First, with the Gazi Raider for Delhi, they have more health and more damage, and they do a little bit extra damage against heavy. Basically, they are the unit Delhi has to make in feudal. Now think about why. Delhi is a map control civ. They desperately need sacred sites for eco, and they want to be on berries for food. So you want the Gazi Raider 1 to protect your sacred sites with map control, and you want to be raiding your opponent to keep them from pushing you, so you can keep those sacred sites. And since they have more health and more damage, they can play that frontline role, and then you make spearmen and archers as needed. Castle and Imperial, they kind of fall off. That's because Delhi currently is in an elephant meta, where once you hit Castle, you want to start making elephants and building units that support elephants. So you just really don't see Gazis made in Castle and Imperial, unless elephants aren't working in that scenario and you need to do mass cav raids. Fire Lancer for China, you can only make them if you go Yuan Dynasty. AOE damage, they do extra siege damage. Really, you only see them super late to just do mass AOE splash raids against vills. Like, they're very good against vills. Like, you get a bunch of Fire Lancers, you find the vills on gold, they'll all die. So they're great for that in the super late game, and like also landmark sniping, but besides that, you might as well just use horsemen. Hobelar for House of Lancaster. Feudal, they're not used that much, mostly because House of Lancaster is doing booms. So they're doing a manor boom, and then they're getting pushed because they're doing manor booms, so then they're doing yeomen and spearmen as a defense. So you just don't see them very much unless the opponent's doing like some crazy mass range of some reason, because Hobelars are very good for that. Hobelars are very fast. They have less melee armor, but a lot more ranged armor, but they're cheaper and they're weaker than Horsemen. So if they're straight up fighting, they're going to lose, but against ranged, they are killer. Now in Castle with the upgrades, they can, if they do the special, Vassal Lancaster does the English King's College upgrade. There we go, King's College upgrade. With their upgrades, you can make them like crazy, and then you just do Hobelar spam. So you're just raiding like crazy to buy yourself space to get food, more banners, whatever. You're just running all over the place. And since their range armor is so high, they can dive TCs and towers no problem. So you use them as a mass harassment unit. Same thing with Imp. You're only really making them if you're doing the mass Horseman harass or mass eco raids, but they're not going to be good in stand-up fights. You're just using them as raiders. Sipahi for the Ottoman is the best Horseman in the game. Bar none, best Horseman in the game. Amazing unit. Now they cost 4 more resources, but they have more health, damage, extra range, damage, and extra range. You don't understand how good extra range is. They can take better fights, they can snipe faster, they can get siege easier because they're harder to body block, they kill vills better. Like, they do everything better, dude. They're so freaking good. You don't see Ottoman make knights. Ottoman doesn't need to make knights because Sipahi are so good. As Ottoman, use them at all points of the game, but the key meta of Ottomans right now is you use them but don't lose them. Right? You mass them, you keep raiding, you keep poking, you get to castle, you make Janissaries, you make siege, and then you do one big push with a lot of Janissaries, a lot of Sipahi, and siege, and you win. But like, they're just so good at pressuring. You get, if you're trying to leave your base and Sipahi are raiding, you're just so scared. They are so good at killing reinforcements because they can just snipe and run. Just very, very good units. But expensive, which is why you don't want to lose them. You want to protect them. Jeanne's Riders, same thing for Jeanne's Champions. Extra, they are a special unit, but you have to pick one of them. You can't do both. Extra damage to crossbows. They do more damage, they have extra hit points, but they're very costly. And same for Jeanne's Champions. They're very specific in the sense that you need to consecrate their stables to make them worth it. Generally, I don't see these used unless you have that eco to support those expensive units, and then they're pretty good. Wand Raiders for Zhuge. They're only available Imperial, only available special upgrade, but they are the ultimate raiding unit. They're fastest unit in the game, high rate of fire, extra damage against villagers, high ranged armor. They just do what Horsemen do, but better, which is that late game mass raiding, and they do an okay as a front line because they're pretty cheap, but like, you're using them just to kill your opponent's eco into a big push. But they are very, very good at that. Then we have the Gilded Horseman with stats kind of close to a knight, but less armor. Feudal, they're great raiding unit, and they can hold up in fights pretty well. Similar to Sipahi, since that like a few of them can just wreck villagers. Castle for OTD, you generally see mass infantry is more common. You still want them around as a raiding unit. Like, you still want a few horsemen just to raid, keep your opponent on their toes, but generally you see mass infantry. Unless you do something like a fast castle into mass horsemen just to raid into a finishing comp. Now Imperial, they are kind of the front line for OTD a lot of the time. That's because when you get biology and full upgrades, they're just freaking tanks, and they're more versatile than men at arms, so you can mass them with Handcannoneers. Handcannoneers will slaughter spearmen, so then the horsemen can get all over their range units or then go run around and raid. So they're just more versatile than men at arms, and they hold up well enough paired with gilded Handcannoneers or gilded crossbows. And so generally Imperial, that's where they really shine, is just like the general frontline raiding unit for OTD. We get to our unique light cavalry. We have the Camel Rider for the Abbasid, which is just kind of an interesting unit. It's technically a light unit. It's better than a Horseman, but in stats, but has no armor. It's really niche. It's just a cav killer. It slaughters cav. It does extra damage against cavalry. It debuffs cav, so it is the cav killer. But against mass range, it will die pretty easily. So in Castle, you only use it if your opponent's pure cav. Besides that, it starts to really struggle. Imperial, it is really good with full upgrades. Like full upgrades, you get extra armor, you get extra attack. At that point, they're insane. And so that's why Abbasid, the late Imperial comp, is mass Camel Riders, mass Camel Archers. It is very, very, very good. Mobile, can take almost any fight. Very strong. That takes us to Knight Lancer. Knights, what a unit. Very good. High damage, high health, high armor, but very expensive. Feudal, if you can make knights in feudal, you make them. A 4 spears which means you can make archers. They can snipe fills. They can tank a lot of damage. They're very, very good. You make them in feudal. Castle, interesting. Knights are interesting, man. They're strongest early. So if you're fast castling or it's early castle, knights just do a much greater impact. But then their cost starts to be, their value starts to reduce very quickly because they get countered by multiple things. They get countered by spears, they get countered by crossbows, and then as walls come up that like, you don't want them to be fighting in your main army. Because they just start dying very fast and their value is not worth it anymore. Like you'd rather that knight have been multiple meta arms that could take a variety of more damage. Instead, their role changes from an army fighter into a raiding unit. And so in castle, you generally actually want to raid with knights, not horsemen. Knights can snipe those faster. They can tank more and get away. The only thing that can catch them is horsemen, which if you're running away with knights and horsemen and spears are chasing you, you just wait till you get away from the spearmen, then turn and kill the horsemen. So it's like, once you start running around with knights in their backline, it's so annoying. So you don't want knights to be fighting with your army. You want knights to be raiding, running around, causing eco havoc. That makes their worth a lot better. Them dying early in a fight is not worth it. The only time it's different is if you have unique knights. We'll get to that in a second. This changes in Imperial because at that point your eco's so good and the opponent is putting up defenses, stuff like that. You just want to use horsemen. Horsemen get way more value. They're cheaper. They're faster. Unless you have special knights. Imperial, that tends to go to the horsemen. It's very common in Imperial never to see knights unless the opposing civ has unique knights that gives them a reason to make them. That takes us to our variation knights or lancers. First, Camel Lancer for the IU bid. Less attack and health, but more charge damage, and also debuffs calves near them. Camel Lancers are basically a must make for IU bid in castle. Almost every strat for IU bid involves a castle timing where you immediately go into mass Camel Lancers, archers, and siege. And you're trying almost always with IU bid, you're trying to win the game or at least do a lot of damage in that early castle period. Camel Lancers start to fall off in Imperial because the fully upgraded Desert Raider is cheaper and just does overall more work. But castle, you are spamming Camel Lancers, you're raiding with them, you're building up into that point, you have enough archers in siege to then take a really good fight. Countereffects for the Byzantines. As I said before, for Byzantine, you're either doing the boom, spearman, olive oil unit strat, or you're doing kind of a quick castle into mass cataphracts. That's because cataphracts, while more expensive, have a lot more health, a lot more damage, and the trample ability. The trample ability allows them to run through units, do damage, so it means they can just snipe siege. If your opponent makes siege, you can just trample through spears and crossbows onto the siege and kill it. Now, the strat must be based around them. You often see people go for the Sister of the Hill, which gives them the ability to regain health, or they do, or you can also do Golden Horn and just make units around them, but I have seen plenty of times mass cataphracts with longbows and archers work amazing, just do amazing work, because once you get a critical mass of like 10 or more, which is very expensive, difficult, but can happen, they just don't die, and you can trample and run around, and they're just a very good unit. But you have to kind of build around them for them to be successful, and it's kind of a one-off thing. Like if you lose your massive cataphracts, it's very hard to then like remake them again because it's so freaking expensive. And that's really a castle thing. In Imperial, they start to fall off because ecos get so big and masses, range mass and spear mass become so big, they just start to fall off. So it's generally like a very castle oriented play for cataphracts. And then we have Royal Knights for French and JD. Extra damage off charges, and then you can get the extra health through Royal Bloodlines and Castle Imperial. Basically, you're using them the entire game. You're using knights. Knights are very, very good unless you're playing against super anti-cav civs, which is like Ayubin and Abbasid. But besides that, it is, or Ottomans of Janissaries. But besides that, it's Knight City, baby. You're making knights at all times. Mounted Samurai, similar to the Royal Knight in that it is a unit that Japanese just want to make no matter what. That's because with the deflective armor, they can take a lot of tough hits at first. You can get their attacks so high, they're just tearing through every unit you could possibly face. And then you generally have some monks because of your landmark, so you're going to heal them. A very common Japanese strategy is fast castle into Radiant Mounted Samurai, into a big push of Mounted Samurai in Yumi or Onna Bugeisha. It's very good. And then even if the game goes imp, you just still make them because they're just so freaking good. You can raid with them. They can take frontline fights because their damage is so high with the Bannermen. and all your Japanese upgrades. It's very, very good. Then we have the Imperial Guard for Tsushi's Legacy. Once again, similar to Yuan Raider, it's a special upgrade only made in Imperial. They have high health, high melee armor, super tanky, but not like the same range armor. They're great against melee comps. The issue being is they're so costly that it's, and if you're running them into range masses, it's just a massive waste of resources. You'd rather just make Horseman Yuan Raiders if it's mass ranged. And then do mass Zhuge and Nesibis. You're really only making Imperial Guard. One, they're actually a pretty sick raider, but they're once again very expensive. So it's like, I'd rather just do Yuan Raiders to raid eco. But if your opponent's doing some sort of mass melee, mass knight, mass men at arm, even spears, because you're usually pairing these with Zhuge, then yeah, they're great. It takes us to the Sofa for the Malayan, which is a do-it-all unit for them. They are considered like a light heavy cav, so better than a horseman, worse than a knight. They do extra damage to all infantry, which makes them very good. And you pair them basically with units that counter cav, though they can hold their own against horsemen. They're played very differently in Feudal versus Castle. In Feudal, you don't really use them because they're expensive. Your eco isn't that great. You'd rather just do Donzos or Musafadi paired with javelin throwers because you're trying to boom and you're being defensive. Once you hit Castle and Imp and your eco gets a lot better, then yeah, it's Malayan. It's not Malayan, it's Sofa, baby. Sofa raid very well. They are very good at taking frontline fights because they do well against melee, and then you can pair them with Poisoner, Archers, and Musafadi, and they're doing, or Donzos, depending on the opponent's comp. They're just very, very good, and so you want to make them throughout the game. Kashik for the Mongol is in a similar situation. They're a light heavy cav, better than Horseman, worse than Knight. You make them at all stages. It's because Mongol is a map control civ. So the reason, so for example, for Malians, you're playing very defensive because you're booming, so you don't really want Sofa. You want defensive units that are cheap and play a really specific role. For Keshik, your map control is so important. You want to trade. You want to keep your opponent hemmed in tight in their base, so you can take map resources. So you want the Keshiks as this unit that's always lurking by their base, always afraid of the dive, always afraid of them stealing villagers, killing villagers. So you make them at all stages of the game. As Mongol base, you're always making them because you always want that raid threat, and they defend Mangudai very well because your Mangudai is your other map control unit that you're making. Gilded Knights for OTD, they're strong, they're tanky, they're way too freaking expensive. You just don't see OTD make them. Outside of instances where it's like a fast castle and there's very few units on the field, so then they're just killing smaller pockets of units by themselves, they're just too expensive, man. They're too expensive. They'll soak so much damage, but then like once your opponent starts getting a lot of anti-heavy, they just die. Or a lot of spearmen, they just die. It's like, I just spent like 400 resources in the unit that died way too fast. I'd even rather have Horseman, Gilded Horseman as a raider than them, because Horsemen are fast and get away. So, just not worth it at this time for OTD to make Gilded Knights. Then we have our Knights Templar page, because they have 3 different Knights. The Chevalier Confrere, the French feudal option. You want to make these, you want to mass these. They're weaker than normal Knights, but they're cheap, and similar idea of Keshik. For Knights Templar, you want map control. You want your pilgrims to get to the sacred sites, and Cav is always better for map control. And then you can make so many archers as Knights Templar, so you want to force your opponent to spear, so you can make archers. So it just makes so much sense for Knights Templar to do the Chevalier Confrere. They also get more health the more of them you mass, so you can make them tankier as you make more of them. Templar Brother unlocked at Castle no matter what you choose for Knights Templar. They're more expensive than Knights with more health, but they have extra charge damage the more of them there are with a certain upgrade. Now the issue is they can be kind of hard to mass. They're very, as I said, they're costly, and you might already have a big mass of Chevalier, so it's like, I'm just going to keep making these guys. Especially if you go into like Genoese Crossbows, you might be like, I'm going to make Chevaliers and then lots and lots of Genoese Crossbow. But if you're getting a lot of Pilgrims, you have a lot of Fortresses up, and you have a lot of extra gold, yeah, Templar Brothers when massed are very good. Slakta Cavalry. This is the reason why the other Men-at-Arm units for Knights Templar aren't picked, because these units are completely broken. They're a broken unit. They're very expensive, but if you're making Imp as Knights Templar, you usually have a pretty good gold trickle. They have more damage, more charge damage, more hit points, 8 ranged armor, and they reduce the attack speed of units around them. That's insane. Once you start making them, they kill everything. Bada bing, bada boom. If you're an Imp as KT, make these units and win. Have fun. Now we're into our very unique units. Units don't really fall into specific categories, but of course they need to be mentioned. Shinobi for Japan, the Koko Township, is the only way you can make them, unfortunately. I wish there was another building you can make to make them, just so you can mask them better. Like, maybe you still have to do Coca to unlock them, but then there's buildings in Castle Imperial you can make to upgrade them and make them better. Because the issue is, once you get past Feudal, they really fall off. After Feudal, their only usage is like continuing to kind of send them to different areas to raid, but they're slow. But I need to explain what they are. They are a specialty unit they have very high damage, extra damage against melee, but they're very weak to ranged. They have the power to like teleport basically, and hide themselves as a vill, but if they have a tower or something, they'll get caught. But they're they can kill vills very fast. They can take fights against horsemen and knights and spearmen and men at arms very, very well. But once again, mass range kills them. They play a very important role in hybrid maps because you can use them to damage buildings, which delays their production, so you use them on opponents' docks to then get an advantage on water. So they're very good on hybrid maps for the dock sabotage and delay. On land maps, though, they do have their use. If you want to do a very all-in style as Japan, you can use them to get pressure really fast, because you can get one for free when you make the landmarks. You can immediately make a unit, get pressure, start that pressure cycle of keeping them off resources. And since they can sabotage, you can kind of suicide them to sabotage TCs to slow villager production or unit production from production buildings, or like pre-damaged towers. So they have a lot of uses, but really only like a feudal all-in. Jeanne d'Arc, she's a hero unit for GD. You have a ranged or melee option. I think the ranged one's a little bit better because you want her to live. You want her to live because her concentration power, which reduces the cost of units and buildings, is like your main eco lever. You want her to live so she gets XP because you want to get her upgraded, and I feel like ranged makes it more likely she lives than melee. And you can also snipe units with your ranged attack as a way to get more XP, and you can like harass fills and stuff like that. But as if you're a JD player, use her powers. That's like the most important thing, man. Don't let her die. Use her powers. Yeah. They have the Meta for the Ottomans. It does AoE buffs. It can do ranged attack speed. Not ranged attack speed, sorry. And it can buff attack speed. It can give you extra range armor or give you extra melee armor. I mean, it's so good, man. Sipahi buff with ranged armor, doing vill dives, crazy. Mass archers or mass ranged with the attack speed buff, crazy. Metters are just so important for the Ottoman fighting. You want to make them at all points of the game. You don't want to overmake them because the buffs don't stack. You only do one buff at a time, but like you want like 3 or 4, so if one gets sniped, your buffs don't go away. But very, very, very good unit for the Ottomans. Make them at all times. The Delhi elephants, they get their own page, man. They're such a unique unit. You have 3 types of elephants. Well, really 2, but a variation of one of them. War elephants are melee. They do AoE attack. They're very, very good against spearmen. They are a little bit weaker overall, but they have super high ranged armor. But they do take extra damage from crossbows. So they're countered by crossbows and spearmen, though kind of barely by spearmen. Tower elephant has really high ranged armor, but they're countered by melee units, any melee unit really. They have archers that do a lot of damage, so they can kite forever, and they also have tusks that do attacks. Sultan Tower elephants are unlocked in Imperial. They have hand cannons. They're the same as Tower elephant, just have hand cannons. Now here's the thing. In Castle, you want to make them. I'd suggest just making more elephants in Castle, and you're kind of using them as a damage sponge, and you make things around it. So if they make spears, you make archers. If they make crossbows, you make Gazis, or archers can still do great, and archers can snipe the crossbows, or Mangudai, something like that. But they're like a damage soak, and they do really good at that. You want to try to keep them alive and heal them. You can make tower elephants too, it's fine, but generally it's war elephants in Castle. Then when you hit Imperial, and you can get full upgrades on them, they're so good. Basically, when you get to Imperial, get your full upgrades for elephants, and all you do is make elephants. For to get the Sultan Tower elephant, you need to do the special landmark, the Sultan's landmark. You get them for free. Put 4 scholars in there, they're pumping. It is so good. They're very hard to beat. Just elephants, siege, and maybe you need to make some units to raid or stuff like that, but and then scholars to heal. So you just survive in Imperial till you get your upgrades. Yeah, they're very, very good. Castle, not so much. They can be countered in Castle, but Imperial, wait. The King for the English, that's if you do only for English, and yeah, only for English in King's Palace. Ooh, brain slow there. It's a knight. You get the first one for free. If it dies, you can pay to have it again. You can only have it one at a time though. It does healing for units outside of combat, so it's great for raids. Use it throughout the game. You can heal your army with it, but just great for constant raiding as the English with horsemen or knights with the king. House of Lancaster, they have the lords. I forgot to put them on here, but House of Lancaster has the lords in their version of the King's Palace, in which they buff the health of the units around them. Ozatsu, which is an AOE Handcannoneer for Japan. They are really good at sieging down buildings, and you get them from the gunsmith landmark. At the same time, if you get enough of them, they'll just actually do great they'll do great damage against mass units. Now they're really weak, right? But you start getting like up to 10 to 15, and they start doing great damage in fights. Grenadier for Zushi in China, very similar thing. In few of them, they're not very good. Mass, they start to do a lot of damage. They can do great building damage. And for Zushi, they do a debuff. They can get an upgrade that causes them to debuff other units with their grenades. So having a few of them in your army is very, very good. If you can make them great, they're not like the thing that'll turn a game, but if you can mass them, pretty good. Javelin Thrower for Malians, such an important unit for them. Anti-range unit. You have to have them attack archers. They're micro heavy, but they're very good. Feudal, you have to make them basically. Feudal, they're so freaking good. I mean, they can even take tower and TC damage. It's crazy. Castle Imperial, they fall off. Why is that? First, they're slow. And so the bigger the armies get, the worse they do. They overkill really bad as well. So it's like, if they're all attacking the same archer, it's such a waste. So as the size of the armies grow and the upgrades start hitting, Castle Imperial archers just do a lot better. And you're also having things like meta arms at knights, which just eat javelin shots. So in feudal, great. Castle Imperial, they start to get really bad. Instead, as Malians, you want to shift into poison arrow archers, which is like your main mechanic for doing lots of damage is poison arrow archers. Genoese for KT, mobile javelin thrower, they're just slow. They're not very good. You'd rather do Genoese crossbows. Or, like, the thing is, the other options are better. Heavy spearmen or Genoese crossbows are just better. So you don't see them very often. And as a KT player, I just say don't make them. Reborn Warrior for Malian, they only come from the Firimba garrison. They're not light or heavy. I'm not going to fix that. I already recorded too much. Not light or heavy. So their only counter is Springholds. They're very good against range. So they have very high range armor. They're very fast. It's very contextual though. Since you only get them from a garrison, you're usually doing Fulani Corral for food. You really only make them if they're doing mass archers. And even that's like, why not just make Sofa? So I just don't see them very often. I don't think they're that amazing. It's only kind of catching your opponent by surprise with like a mass of them rushing their base. Lastly, wow. Okay. Windguard Raiders, Windguard Footmen. Only English can make them. They come from the Windguard Palace Imperial. They're very good. Windguard Footmen's a super tanky men at arms. Windguard Raider is a super long range, better longbow. Yeah, they're great. We can only make them out of the Windguard Palace, so you have to protect them to mass them. But they are very good once you get a lot of them. So make them. Great. Do it. Awesome. Always. It's Imperial. Work it. Work it, king or queen, whoever you are. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions. If I miss a unit, I will hate myself and point it out, and I will explain it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck on your games, and thank you. Bye.